Bleach Revisited. I am Karkur Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and the narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the chapter connects to the rest of the manga. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are focusing on for this episode. This is Chapter 96, Blood Red Conflict. Ichigo, are you alright? Oh my. He's still standing after taking a blow from Zabimaru. I can't believe it. Shoot, I'm dizzy. That one rocked me. My legs feel like rubber. I lost too much blood against Ikaku. Stop swaying, darn it. Shoot! You talk big, but you can barely stand. I'm finishing this. Bleach, Chapter 96, The Blood Red Conflict. It's impossible. I can't believe it. He's fighting an assistant captain? He can't win? Renji's missing? Where is he? Izuru Kira, assistant captain, 3rd Company. I don't know. He disappeared during the meeting, and when I went looking for him at the 6th Company's adjutant's room, I found this. His adjutant's badge. Did you tell the captain about this? No, not yet. I thought about telling Captain Aizen, but I didn't want Renji to get into trouble. Oh, not that I think that Captain Aizen would be unfair to Renji. I know. But since we don't know why Renji's missing, I think you did the right thing. But why would he disappear at a time like this? I don't know where he went, but it must have been urgent if he left his badge when he was under orders to wear it. He seems distressed about Miss Kuchiki lately. I hope he hasn't gotten himself into trouble. Alright. I'll look for him, too. Make sure my captain doesn't find out. Good. Thanks, Izuru. Where are you, Renji? You're tough. So you really want to save Rukia, eh? You idiot. I don't want to save her. I'm going to save her. Silence! Rukia was condemned because you stole her powers. Don't you realize that? Rukia is going to die because of you, and you have the audacity to show your face here and say that you're going to save her. It's all your fault. I know that Rukia was sentenced to death because of me. That's why I've come to save her. You scum! That's it. It can only do 3 consecutive attacks. The more powerful the attack, the fewer times it can be employed in succession. A revolver fires 6 times. A missile only once. The number of consecutive attacks is always predetermined. He can swing Zabimaru in its normal state 1 time. When it's extended, he can strike 2 more times, for a total of 3 attacks. After the 3rd attack, Zabimaru goes back to normal. The number of attacks may vary, so you need to determine the maximum number. If he becomes desperate, your opponent will always strike the maximum number of moves. 1. If you can determine the maximum number, you'll know when he's vulnerable. 2. after the last attack of the series, and before the first attack of the next. 3! Ah! Your enemy will be defenseless. It's over, Renji! Huh. I told you, you have no chance of defeating me. That is it for Chapter 96, The Blood Red Conflict. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter and we can discuss a little bit about what's going on in this chapter. Kind of the art, the narrative, maybe some other thematic things going on, as well as give a little bit of my response, how I feel about the chapter personally. So we open on, of course, as what you would expect from the previous chapter setting up this fight, we jump right back into it, right? And this whole chapter stays focused on the fight, even though we do know that, we do have these other characters that are all running around. There's only one cut away from the fight, and it still kind of keeps itself focused on the fight in a way, and that we have that cut to Momo and Kira. So this fight is very much like, there's people that will talk about like fights getting broken up between chapters, and that they don't really like that. And I am primed to disagree. I think a chapter can be broken up between, or a fight can be broken up between multiple chapters and still be perfectly fine. So long as the fight's hitting certain highlights, and so long as we're cutting away to other moments that are significant to kind of intercut that fight, right? But there are people that certainly can't stand whenever a fight gets broken up. They'd rather it all be consecutive. But I don't know. I like getting different characters' points of view. I like hopping around. I like being left in suspense for certain moments. And so there's a little bit of that on the small scale in this chapter, which I think illustrates kind of the better moments whenever Kubo does break up fights. And whenever I say break up a fight, I mean just like splitting it between a thing, not having it be entirely consecutive pages or chapters. Now, of course, we had this very defining Ichigo the last chapter, right? Talking about how, it's been some mad game, talking about how if this is Renji's power, he's got no problem, right? But here we're really seeing like the full extent of the wound that Ichigo's taken. And it's kind of significant because we've had it mentioned before, the significance of taking a head wound like this, right? And that it might, make it a little bit harder for you to fight as you're bleeding over your eyes and all of that. So, kind of neat. And then also, just this panel of Ichigo, I think, does a really good job of not just making the character look great, but also really selling Ichiro's exasperation and his desperation, right? Like he's fighting to keep his eyes up. He's kind of his whole back is almost shunted down, like he can't stay upright. The striking nature of the blood kind of almost mimicking the spur of his hair. It's good stuff. And I love the way that like the black of the blood drips into his Shihakusho and kind of fades into it, where you can't even tell the difference between the two. It's just effective use of the inks there. And really, Kubo will end up doing this throughout the series, but I really do love the way that this is just portrayed. I think it should be given a little bit of attention, We really get like a much more desperate looking Ichigo, much more like kind of on the weekend Ichigo here. And I do not mean, Saturday and Sunday. I mean on the weaker side of things. I like the little perspective that we get here of Ichigo from the other side as he's got the blood over his face all splattered and everything. It's very cool. Also, please do excuse my cat has decided that he wants to chase things around in the middle of me recording. So, that's just going to be some Yurichi commentary for you. Now we do get like Ichigo realizing himself, like, okay, I have to stay in this. I love that we get it highlighted, like he has just come off of the Sikaku fight. I think that's pretty significant. I mean, they rested for a little bit, but it hasn't been a whole day even. So, like, consider the wounds that he occurred, like, the wounds that he took during the Ikaku fight, he's still dealing with. He's still got this blood loss. Which again, I've talked about that. Like, you're a ghost. How can you use blood? What's the deal even? And I think it's more like he's still just spiritually wounded from that fight. He hasn't completely made a recovery, is the idea, right? Um, of course, Renji notices this, and I love that we get Renji popping right into, like this like little like Ichigo. I kind of interpret this moment as Ichigo kind of trying to find his footing, like this gas coming from him, right? This panel is a little bit hard to follow because the Shihakusho and the footwork. I mean, that could be anybody, right? Like you could interpret this as Ichigo's his vision blurring as he's finding it hard to even like look at Renji's feet. You could see this as maybe him wobbling. You could see this as Renji moving very quickly. It's hard to really tell. So I don't know. This panel could be a little bit clearer in what it's trying to portray. But nevertheless, it's a short moment because we quickly get to these very good kind of action panels. I love this immediate like shot into Renji's already in the air coming around with Zabimaru, and I love the full kind of page, close up of Renji as he's bringing down Zabimaru to be like, I'm finishing this, and he cleaves so hard that it tears through the entirety of the building that Ichigo had crashed into. That's good stuff. And I also do like the perspective where we have, Ganju and Hanataro over here, and Ichigo's only kind of walked a few steps from the hole in the wall. So it's really effective, and I also love that, we have like Renji at the top right here, and we can follow like down and left to the, like we see the effects is what I'm saying of his attack before we really see like him actually making the strike, which is cool, right? It's a neat moment. We do get confirmation of exactly how yoked out Renji is. Moreover, we get to see his tattoos in full. Assumably, they are echoed across the other side of his body as well, right? But I don't know. Like Renji's tattoo, I feel is meant to be evocative of Zabimaru, right? I mean, it's. I hesitate to say that it's cool because it does remind me of tribal tattoos, which, oof. I wonder if the people that really are into like cultural policing have gotten on to tribal tattoos as being appropriation. I don't see them as appropriation as much as I see them as lame. But it's not for me. If you have a tribal tattoo, no offense to you. I mean, I think tattoos in general are pretty cool. They're not for me, but I like art. As far as Renji's tattoos go, they are a significant part of his design, and it's neat to see. We're getting to see these other sides of Renji, But also, it's nice that we can see just like how far he's willing to go. How's that linked to this at all? Come on. But the full suite of Zabimaru as we see the full suite of his tattoos. Maybe we're getting this fuller kind of picture of Renji, and this chapter cover also really boasts like a Renji looking powerful and strong, and with this sort of bearing this tattoo that perhaps representative of Zabimaru is like him bearing Zabimaru as well. So I think this chapter cover does a really good job of really linking into the chapter itself. Whenever a lot of the covers that we get don't necessarily do that, and you can really see Kubo having a lot of fun with the inks in this one, really defining like these muscle mass and bone structure and the different planes of the face and body, really being sort of over the top with this inking, and I love it. Even especially like on the Shihaku show and how like we have these kind of broader inks. It's good stuff. I'm a fan of it. I really am. I also like whenever Renji's hair is given like these very thick outlines. I like drawing hair with very thick outlines. But yeah. It's interesting stuff. Um, of course, here we get that Ichigo has stopped the attack from hitting him and sort of sidestepped it. He's still gotten hit, in the shoulder a little bit, but I like that he like leaps out of the way here, jumps on top of the building, And I like that Renji immediately follows him up, and we get this, like, I love, almost like like a shark movie where you could see the shark chasing its prey kind of thing, or like a slasher film or something. Just the whip back of Zabimaru as he pulls it from where he struck out of the building, and it out like this way as like this other tearing cut. It's good stuff. It's very exciting. And we get him like lashing it around with like Ichigo runs, turns to confront, and then there's yet another kind of clash, right? Off in the distance, we don't even get to see what it is as the two like charge at each other. I love that we just get Hanataro and Ganju just kind of there, like, huh. We close up, and yeah, Hanataro is kind of freaking out, right? He can't really believe that Ichigo is daring to go up against a assistant captain, which, oh boy, this chapter was using adjutant, adjutant or whatever, instead of assistant captain. Like, just start calling them lieutenants, Viz, please, please, please. I would like that. I'm not a fan of reading your 800 different ways of saying lieutenant. For those not in the know, are like even vice captain. Come on, those not in the know, the assistant captains or the adjutant captains, they eventually are just referred to as vice captains or lieutenants, either in other translations or even in the Viz one later. So it's the assistant captain and adjutant are both things that, like, not translations that they stick with throughout the entirety of the series, and thankfully so, because assistant captain feels a little, I don't know, it's not proper English, like you wouldn't call anyone second in command an assistant captain. Like I understand maybe organizational language, like someone's like an assistant manager, the manager and assistant manager, that kind of thing, but like, yeah, it'd be like chairman of the board and then assistant chairman of the board. Don't you say like vice chair? Something like that. I don't know. I just feel like it's with captains and with this hierarchical structure, you wouldn't use assistant. It feels a little bit weak in its language. I don't know. I think lieutenant fits because it feels like a military kind of designation, right? And then of course, vice captain, if you're trying to say that, like, okay, well, this is a, right under captain, right? So it's a vice captain, right? Sub captain, bottom captain. Anyway, moving on. We have this clash, right? And Hanataro very much is in the same shoes that Renji's in, right? We see that he's a product of Soul Society as much as Renji is. That Hanataro truly believes that, like, Ichigo just can't defeat somebody of this strength. That, like, there are just people that you can't beat, no matter how much conviction you have, no matter how strong you think you are. These people are like the upper echelon, and they you don't go against their wishes, because they're going to just kill you, right? I love that, of course, we get this panel. We also, a very serious Renji is he's got a frustration here because, even though Ichigo should lose, even though he can't win, he's still defiantly fighting, right? And Renji can't quite stomp him out. It's like if there was like a little flame in your house, like a little fire, just like a little tiny one, no bigger than like a nickel, no bigger than a dime, no bigger than a piece of coinage currency, whatever you've got in your country. Just a small little fire, tiny fire in your house. Not really an issue, but it might grow. It might be a problem. You don't want to have a fire in your house. Not a good time. So you got to stamp it out, right? Yeah, it's a little fire. I can just stamp it out. You burn your foot, and the fire doesn't go out. Well, then you get a problem, right? And that's kind of what's happening here. Is Renji's trying to just stamp out Ichigo, right? He's trying to hold on to this structure of the world that he believes to be true, but Ichigo threatens that, And every time that Renji brings down his blade to stamp out Ichigo, it's yet more that Ichigo's flame of resolute strength grows stronger and stronger, and maybe starts to threaten everything that Renji believes in. Right? Which then threatens Renji himself because, if he could have just been the one to stand up and achieve all of this, like, he could have solved things, couldn't he? So, like, he has to deal with, reconcile being complicit in everything. This final panel of saying Renji's missing did cause me to completely have to restart the recording because I did not have context for who was saying it, and I thought that it was a revelatory moment. Like, what? Oh, he's missing his attacks? And it's like, no, this is Kira expressing that Renji, the vice captain, is missing. And we do get confirmation of this character's name, Izuru Kira. He is the assistant captain of the third company. That would be Ichimaru Gen's company. We can see the flower design on his badge. Now, notably, I haven't really brought it up, but every one of the 13 court guards, the Gote 13, each one of these squads, each one of these companies, however it gets translated, every one of these branches of this organization, they all have a flower that also symbolizes them. Now, I'm not huge into the significance of flowers, nor do I have much insight on why Kubo chose those specific flowers either. I can only speculate from my personal point of view, but I tend to see it as sort of an ornation that doesn't quite fit the reality of this brutal organization, right? It is like this sort of ornamental dressing, kind of just like these like robes and everything else to sort of make these people feel like they're dignified and not just warriors keeping people under their thumb through strength alone, right? So they have these symbols that they associate, and they make the symbols out of pretty little flowers. Flowers are cool, man. I'm an amateur botanist, not even, but I do like watching botany videos and having people talk about cool plants. Speaking about cool plants, let's talk about Izuru Kira, right? So, Gen's vice captain, we haven't really gotten a lot from Kira yet. We've gotten to see a little bit of his design. Really, there's not much going on to it besides what we've seen so far. So he has this, his hair is blonde in the series, both in the anime and the manga and all that. But he's this blonde guy. He's got the hair over half of his face, this sort of emo look. But we don't really know that much about Kira at this point in time, besides the fact that he works alongside Gen. So this is really some of the first interactive dialogue. We have Kira express things before, but they've been kind of just a part of the scene, like in the previous chapter, right? So here we're actually getting an interaction between him and Hinamori Momo, right? This is Aizen's vice captain, and so she's expressing she's got Renji's badge folded up, and that he left behind, that they're all supposed to be wearing right now because this is an important sort of crisis moment. And I actually do kind of like this because this is something that sometimes gets harped on, is why would Renji not know who the captains and vice captains are? But I do like that they actually, to distinguish themselves, they have these markers of position. And, it's not just a status symbol, but it's also probably so that other people can recognize them as oh, hey, that's a third division guy, or that's, the vice captain of that division, even if they don't know them personally, right? The guy, if everybody at your work has to walk around with a badge on, it becomes really easy to recognize the people that don't have one, right? And at my workplace, there's different colors of badges, so you can easily identify who's in what sort of positions. But that's kind of what's going on here. Is you just have this sort of indicator that helps you really, at a quick visual, tell who's who, or at least their rankings and their positions, right? And we get a close up of course, the flower that's on Renji's, the 6 companies badge. Kira kind of is a little worried, and he asks if Momo has told Aizen about this, right? Captain Sosuke Aizen, and she expresses that she hasn't. And we get this moment where, like, Kira clearly becomes like worried one way or the other, and there's a couple different ways you can read this, right? You can certainly interpret this as like, okay, well, Renji's kind of run off on his own and left behind his badge, and is like directly disobeying this order to wear this badge for some reason. Um, Now, like, Kira might be trying to protect Renji or Momo, right? With like, oh, did you tell anybody? Like, am I the first person you're telling? All of that. But it also could be that he has ill intent, right, to cover this up for some reason or another. And so I like that this scene is given like that sort of significance, right? That we're being invited to sort of question Kira, especially knowing his relation as the vice captain of Gin's squad, right? So this is planting like these little seeds of like, well, whose side is Kira on, so on and so forth. And I do like that it kind of gets perhaps like even more highlighted here, where Momo says that she doesn't want to get Renji in trouble, so she's clearly trying to cover for Renji, and we get that Momo is a very honest character, right? We get the sense that like she very much like holds all of her emotions on her sleeve. She's very open with things. I mean, if she wanted to hide the fact that Renji left behind his badge or use that against him, she probably wouldn't be bringing it up with another character like this. Not, at least not in this way. So, we get a bit of earnesty on Momo's part, and we're starting to understand her in this way, which, we could kind of gather that from earlier, but now we have her interacting with another character altogether. Of course, I love that she kind of, it's like, oh, I don't think Captain Aizen would be unfair to him, and I love that Izuru kind of just like, yeah, look, I know. And kind of has this logical response, right? Like, well, we don't know why Renji's missing, so I think you did the right thing. And then he speculates, why would he disappear? So it must have been something urgent. He seems distressed about Rukia. So I do like this, that we're given this initial kind of like, well, why is Kira, asking this? Why is he doubting this? But then we get him kind of sleuthing and sussing out, like, okay, what's going on with Renji? So at the very least, if Kira is putting on sort of a front here, if he's trying to intentionally mislead Momo or something, then he's doing a damn good job of it. But at the very least, we get him kind of working through this as the sort of more dynamic plot starts to unravel in front of us. Especially, what makes it unravel is that we have those A and the B plots that we talked about before in previous episodes. That we have the rescue Rukia plot and the execute Rukia conspiracy, and those are going to, of course, run into each other. And as they start to collide in these ways, obviously, the first collision being the biggest first point of contact that they both have, which is Renji, who is like a central character of both, right? He is a character that Ichigo will have to overcome should he want to rescue Rukia. But also Renji himself wants to save Rukia from this execution, right? So it puts him in an interesting position for kind of the first point of that sort of, or first major point of that sort of interaction between those two plots. But because of that, other characters like Kira, like Momo, are starting to piece together, like, okay, well, there's something more going on here. Something that involves Kuchiki, something that involves Renji, something that would have Renji not wearing his badge for some reason. So it's interesting that we're getting these characters that we are just now getting introduced to. Like, I mean, we know that they exist in the universe. We've known since it was established to us that there are captains and vice captains, so there must have been a captain of the third division. We meet him, Ichimar, again, and we're like, okay, well, who's this guy's vice captain? And now we've finally properly been introduced to Izuru Kira, and we're finally getting some interaction. But this is a character that hasn't existed even for a whole chapter of Bleach yet, really. Like he on page has had less than a chapter to exist. As of this point, like he's maybe been in like 8 panels, So it's interesting that like these are the characters that Kubo has decided to go to. And that's one of the things that I think is a strength of Bleach, is that it does have this really robust and kind of well-designed and interesting cast. but that Kuo-Tite does a good job of balancing that cast for the most part. As it becomes larger and more unyieldy, it becomes a little bit of a harder act to uphold, especially whenever he decides, well, everybody should get battles, right? And it's like, oh, well, that's a bit more difficult. So, obviously, we're not going to get a satisfying battle for every single one of the captains and vice captains, one on one, right? Because, geez, we'd be here all day. But we'll get to see plenty from a lot of these characters as we move forward, right? So it's neat, But you think about like scoping your plot out, like if you're like, okay, well, initially you really only had like 5 main characters with like significant powers, like in our Karakura group. So it was a little bit easier to give each of them, some screen time, some stories, some interactions, so on and so forth. But now, as we're getting into the Soul Society arc, and the Shinigami aren't presented as the sort of black and white antagonists to just be defeated in the same way Hollows were, right? That there's a little bit more nuance to this group of antagonists, that they aren't all necessarily just against Ichigo and his allies. There's going to be more significant interaction, and then also because they're intelligent, because they're all moral agents of their own, and because they're all trying to figure out what's going on, they're going to have various different like schisms and interactions within their own group. So yeah, it's something that I think Bleach does so well that it's easy to overlook. And honestly, this is what makes these another aspect of what makes the Soul Society arc of Bleach so significant and so popular and such a big thing in shonen manga. Like I can't think of many other manga that establish a villain organization like this. And I say a villain organization, I mean like an antagonistic organization, and then presents the characters as well-roundedly and as having these many points of kind of contact and these histories, and really making the characters feel like deserving in their own right, and then giving them actually kind of appropriate and worthwhile screen time on top of balancing a main cast that exists outside of those characters. It's rare that it gets done. And I'm trying to think of like any that even start to come close. Like none of them come close to the scale of Bleach at all. I'm thinking about like the contemporaries that Bleach has, right? Naruto has, for instance, like in early Naruto, you have the various different ninja villages, but like really you only get 3 characters from each of those, and a lot of those characters kind of have to get shoehorned into fights. You have to have literally like a tournament arc to give them an excuse to fight somebody. Yeah, and some of those characters completely don't even do anything at all. They're kind of not really showcased. I will say I do love the Chunin Exam arc because I think it does handle that pretty well. But those characters feel like, I don't know, they maybe don't feel like that great of representations, or those characters feel like less evocative of their homeland than they should be. The only ones I can even really remember are the Sand Ninja and the Sound Ninja. So I don't know if there were other ones. It's not coming to me, but yeah, it's that sort of thing. Whereas like, I think later in the series you have the Akatsuki, but like, I don't know. Those a lot of times that I think a lot of shonen authors try to do the same thing that Bleach is doing, where Bleach is like, okay, here's this entire, villain outfit, right? This organization. Typically, what ends up happening is that the characters are made so distinctive that it just feels like a number of individuals that happen to be arranged on the same side. So I'm thinking about things like the Akatsuki, right, in Naruto. They just kind of feel like 7 or however many there are. They just feel like a bunch of individual characters that like, I don't know. They don't really feel like a cohesive group to me. Even if they have like costuming that's the same. It just feels like I came up with like characters with these powers, and it's an excuse to like get these other characters to fight them. It doesn't. it doesn't feel like a part of the world, or that it does that much service to the world building, or that they have that many interactions that feel as organic as the myriad interactions that we see here within like this whole hierarchical structure that we have with the Soul Society. But even thinking of other groups and other manga, like I think of Hunter x Hunter, right? Um, and it's really hard for me to really think of any of the organizations, like the criminal organizations, or even the Chimera Ants, like hierarchy. Again, they all just kind of feel like, okay, here's my gang of several individuals, and I basically I came up with 15 disparate characters that don't really have a common link, not really, and I put them all on the same squad. You know, like it doesn't feel like a part of the world that feels, I don't know, like it should exist, even if that makes sense. Like I feel very much whenever those organizations get introduced in other series, I can really feel the hand of the author. I can really like see like, okay, well, this is created, these characters were created to serve this sort of prop of antagonist focus. And like, as much as I do like the like My Villain Academia stuff, right? Like the villain arc of My Hero Academia, where they really focus on the antagonist group. Again, it just feels like, okay, well, I want to make an antagonist group. I just came up with like a series of characters rather than these characters feeling like they kind of organically exist within the world. And I think the reason why Bleach pulls off what it's doing is that we get the hierarchy shown to us and explained to us before we've met a lot of the characters. Like, we still don't even know all of the captains, right? I think that's well done. I think that, we've seen the captains, but we haven't had them all, like, here's this guy and this is what he does, and here's this person and this is what she does, and this is like, we haven't had that. Like, I don't even think we can name half the captains right now. We've seen not even all of them. We've seen 12 of them, you know, uh, much less all of their vice captains, right? So like, it's the sort of thing that like I think because the manga isn't trying to be a shonen manga, or at least it doesn't come off across as like, okay, well, I've got to introduce the reader to these characters and establish these characters so the reader can look forward to these characters having these fights that I'm setting up. And like, I don't know, Bleach very much feels like it's much more focused on just presenting its world and presenting like a world that feels like it has some integrity to it. Um, and it's an example of someone who very much seems inspired by Bleach, who feels like he learned all the wrong lessons from Bleach. The guy that makes I'll bring it up. I've harped on this before. Demon Hunter, right? This is Demon Hunter. The like Hashira, the pillars, the way that those characters are introduced. I think we meet one of them, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we meet more than one of them right away. But anyway, you essentially meet one of them, and then like they kind of like them as an organization, them as a whole thing, doesn't really. It takes a while for it to finally, like, whenever it gets introduced, it doesn't really make that much sense for me in the world. And then whenever they finally do introduce all of these characters, right? Whenever they try to have a similar moment to the one that we had in Bleach, right, where we see all the captains organized for the first time in their chambers, and like that moment in Bleach like works so well and is so tightly handled, whereas that moment in Demon Slayer, like every single character feels like they're fighting for space in the scene. They feel like they have to like really loudly do the thing their character does. Like, so, where and I maybe I should have talked about this more in that chapter with the captains, since I'm harping on it now, but like, there's so much this sort of like, I really need to express what this character is about, not just in terms of design, but also in terms of what the character says and does on screen. And it's like, like some like, I don't know, insecurity about not making a proper impression upon the reader. And it's like, no, the reader will pick up stuff. Readers are smart. I don't know. It feels like it undermines my intelligence, like to be like, okay, and this is the guy who's very violent, and this is the one who is like got a crush, and here's the guy that's crying, and like it's like, dude, I like it feels so extra in a way that like I don't know, it's that sort of anime like I'm not gonna say cringe. It's not necessarily cringe, but it feels excessive and sophomoric in its writing because it doesn't feel like it has confidence that it can portray these characters in a naturalistic or even subtle way. Um, and I mean, like, I understand anime is very much about being expressive and at times gaudy and showy. Um, but you can also present your characters as, you know, people. Uh, and I think that's one of the things that Bleach does very effectively, and I think why people care about Bleach characters a lot. Um, Not just because of their designs or their cool powers, but because the characters feel a little bit more actualized and like they actually are a part of their world because their interactions feel a little bit more naturalistic. And so to pull this all back to this, this panel, this interaction here, this feels like a very natural interaction. We as readers have reason to maybe doubt Kira or wonder exactly how much Kira knows being Gin's vice captain because we have to wonder how much Gin knows, right? But then also like us having Kira working through this, we're starting to understand the way that Kira's mental process works. That he is like presenting this, and he's like, okay, well, it must be this, then maybe this. He's piecing these pieces together, and it's helping us if we haven't gotten there ourselves piece it together too. And I just like that. I think it's like this moment is just effective, and I love that like Kira working through it seems to like kind of help Momo. She looks a little less distressed. Uh, and I like that Kira, agrees like, okay, well, I'm going to look for him too, and I'll make sure that my captain doesn't find out. So, the both of them have decided like, okay, well, we're going to try to keep this from escalating to being a bigger issue, and we're not going to let it that our captains Eisen and Gin know, which is interesting because as far as we understand, Eisen and Gin seems to suspect, or Eisen seems to suspect Gin, and Gin seems pretty slippery as is, especially about the things that he does and doesn't know. Um, so it's interesting that we have both their vice captains interacting in this way, and that they have a much dynamically different relationship than their captains, right? Where their captains don't seem like they can trust each other at all. We have Momo coming to Kira in a moment of worry to kind of to confide in him. So it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition that's drawn, and it gives us a lot to think about as these moving parts start to kind of spin. Of course, where's Renji? He's in this fight, yeah. And I love, Zabimaru kind of whipping around, even though we only get in the corner here. I love it, like, we get this sense of momentum from the fight as we get Zabimaru hefting around. And again, Renji seems so just frustrated that Ichigo won't just, like, get put down, right? Ichigo's defiance, his stubbornness, and we get this is the lie that Renji has sold himself, right? That Rukia was condemned because Ichigo stole her powers, right? That Rukia is going to die, and that it's Ichigo's fault that she's going to die, right? Whereas Renji knows the truth. It's not Ichigo's fault at all. It's the Soul Society's fault. Like, Ichigo's not going to execute Rukia. Like, he is screaming at Renji that he's going to save Rukia's life. Like, the last thing that Ichigo is going to do here is kill Rukia. If anything, it's Renji stopping Ichigo that's going to be at fault of Rukia, being killed, right? And I love that, Ichigo is, like, willing to take, like, yeah, I know she was sentenced to death because of me. But that's why I'm saving her, you idiot. Like, like he's willing to take the blame for that much, but he is not the one that's going to be bearing the executioner's blade. He's not the one slamming down the block on the guillotine himself, right? He may have been a part of the crime that she was pushed on, but Renji at this point should know better. I mean, Aizen told him as much, right? Renji should suspect that it's not Ichigo's fault at all, but it's Soul Society's. But at this point, Renji has convinced himself, at least a bit, more than anything else, that the blame is to be put on something that he can do something about, right? That if he puts the blame on Ichigo, if he sees Ichigo, this person weaker than him, as the person that's the cause of his grief, at the very least he feels like he can get revenge and defeat Ichigo, but it's not going to save Rukia. It's a delusion, you know. And Renji's kind of convinced himself that he'll find some peace in kind of misaligning the blame onto Ichigo, but we know he won't. We know he's in the wrong. And I do love this. This is such a cool moment, as the very well flowing arcing Zabimaru gets knocked aside, and it's got this it's kind of all askew and not done, not right, as Ichigo starts to sort of command the battle. Renji bringing it back and going for another strike, and I like Ichigo having this moment of remembering, of course. I like his read this way. Thank you, Viz. Appreciate it. But I like having this moment of flashback, and of course we know it's flashback because Kubo is using his key visual style of putting the background in black. This has been a while since we've had one of those. I think so, at the very least. Could you tell I didn't remember how I voiced Kisuke before? Because I totally was shooting from the hip there. But nevertheless, I like that we get this insight that we didn't see every single moment of Ichigo's training, but clearly Kisuke has trained Ichigo over those days that he trained him and imparted this different knowledge, right? And I love this. This is setting up rules for the universe and for the power structures in Bleach. Rules that would be followed more or less loosely, but it's presented naturalistically because Ichigo is doing a battle with Zabimaru. He's got to figure out how the nature of his enemy's power works, and so he remembers, okay, well, there's only so many attacks it can do. The number of attacks is predetermined. Every enemy only has so many attacks they can do within a certain amount of time. So that's the time to strike, right? Whenever they're between their maximum number of attacks during their reload, so to speak, right? And thinking on that and thinking of how that relates to Bleach, I don't know. That maybe sort of hold true. I'll have to think about it a little bit more, but we'll maybe talk about that in the spoiler section, yeah? Whether or not that entirely fits a lot of the future battles in this series. Nevertheless, I do like that Ichigo has this moment, and I love, of course, Urahara being zoomed in, and we get just his lips intercut. This is, Ichigo is closing in for this, and I love that Renji has this realization. This is such a great moment. Is that as Ichigo is kind of defiantly blocking his attacks, Renji realizes that Ichigo knows the structure of his attacks, that Ichigo is going to attack him in this moment. That's not shock so much as it is realization that Ichigo's going to try to exploit this weakness of his. And yeah, I just do love this, of course, this lunge for Ichigo, this insistence that it's over. Now, kind of interestingly, I think this does echo. There's a panel, pretty sure, in this chapter, even. This starting one, where we have Ichigo, bottom right, Renji kind of lunging in to take advantage, right? The first attack of this interaction. And then come to the end of this chapter, and we have very much the same setup, where it's Ichigo lunging in, Renji bottom right. So it's exactly the same sort of dynamicy to the panel. But if you'll remember, in that instance, Ichigo managed to sidestep the attack. So it's a kind of cool parallel that happens there, just on the visual side of things. I do like that a lot. But the other thing that you can read from both of these is this is both, again, I'll bring back talking about just the way in which action is choreographed in manga, these are both left like oriented attacks moving rights, which is against the flow of the page, right? And so naturally they're going to have less vigor and strength and lasting power to them. They tend to be antagonistic actions rather than ones that work for our protagonist. And so, of course, Renji sidesteps it. And I do love, like this after image is Ichigo strikes, and that's one of the things. Ichigo is supposed to be very fast. That's one of his traits, is that he's a very quick combatant. And so the fact that he's quick but not quite quick enough for Renji here, and I think the reason why is because Renji had that realization earlier. It didn't matter how fast Ichigo was. Renji knew that an attack was coming, and so he could preemptively start to move out of the way. Pretty cool stuff. And of course, it speaks towards Renji being trained, knowing how he fights, the weaknesses of his own combat with Zabimaru. And it also speaks towards just the difference in not skill level so much as like martial experience between the two, right? That Ichigo's putting to work something that he learned like last Friday, and Renji is somebody who ostensibly has been training for years. So, yeah, we get the sense that, like, yeah, bud, like, this dude's like 200 years old. What are you doing, Ichigo? And of course, speaking of right to left action, and like that action being the action that tends to land on page, we get that huge cleave for Renji, and very much echoing the sort of the huge kind of battle ending cleave that Ichigo did to Ikaku, right? That shoulder to hip slice. Now I will say something about that slice. There's in Kendo. Maybe not just Kendo, but like in sword fighting in general, there's a number of different strikes that you can do to your opponent, right? And generally, for using a sword against an opponent, the hardest strike to do that would actually like follow all the way through is a shoulder to hip slice. So, like if you have a sword that is sharp enough to cut shoulder to hip, and you are capable of doing that, I think that like tends to either one reflect the quality of the sword, or two reflect the quality of you as a practitioner of the blade, right? So and it's also generally kind of a flashy and lethal way of depicting a battle ending anyway. But the reason why I bring this all up is because I think Kubotai is pretty cognizant of swordplay. I mean, he made the whole manga focused on sword combat, really. Now we had, people fighting hollows, but now that we've moved to Shinigami, now that's become the central conflict of the series, we're going to see a lot more of this sort of sword-on-sword conflict, right? If not using, whatever abilities that we have. Obviously, Ikaku is not using a sword for most of that fight. He's using this three-part spear, this Sankatsu or whatever it was, right? But yeah, so it's neat here that not only does this echo the way in which Ikaku was defeated, but also is this kind of powerful across the body strike. And Ichigo, his all of the momentum that he was trying to build from the left side of the page to the right is then forced back by Renji as he assumes the sort of dominant role in this. And it's interesting because this is the sort of role that we would expect our protagonist to be in, right? Our protagonist is the one that tends to lead the right to left action on the page, and so Renji usurping that really speaks towards his own strength and capabilities here. Also, it's just a pretty cool shot. Zabimaru looks great, and yeah, Renji just looks like he's really in charge here, whereas Ichigo's getting deleted. And that's the end of this chapter, and we get this little interlude where we have Zabimaru's kind of fang drawing blood, right? It's cool stuff. But yeah, that's it for this chapter as far as talking about the art and narrative goes. I think it is really strong stuff. I really do like that the choreography of this fight. As Ichigo trying to closes in and figures something out and goes in for this final strike, and Renji's able to kind of get out of the way and land this blast. But I really also love the collateral and like this whole like he whips the sword into the building. Ichigo, jumps out of the way, lands on the roof. Renji like whips the sword out of the building as it arcs up, like, and Ichigo's like running. Like, I love this panel especially. I think is fantastic. Bates Renji to jump on top of the building as he's whipping Zabimaru back. They crash on top of the building. Is the rest of the fight on literally on top of this building? Am I losing my mind? I thought they were back on the ground later, but maybe they're still. Yeah, they're back on the ground by here. We clearly have ground tiles that are sort of messed up, and I don't think we really get a sense of our environment after that. Now, this is one thing that does come up. Yeah, there's some ground. One thing that does come up is that Bleach, Kubo doesn't draw backgrounds very much, and this is what they mean, right? That our environments kind of can quickly get lost whenever they're not significant, and I think that's fine. Honestly, the focus is on the character action, focuses on these very intense back and forth between the characters. You don't need that other stuff in panel. In fact, it's a distraction. Like, I don't know, it doesn't serve the manga in this. And there's certainly manga that have fantastic background artwork that really incorporate their environments. I'm immediately thinking about Chainsaw Man. The second part of it has been starting, and there's a really great moment in that incorporates the environment in a really cool way. Like around chapter, what is it, like 93 or 4 right now? Around chapter 100 maybe. Cat is fine too, that one. But it's interesting stuff nevertheless. Like, I think environments can be used, but Kubo, I think, realizes that they're not quite a strength for him to incorporate in these battles, and he wants the battles to really be focused in these battles between these characters, right? And focus really more on these huge character moments and in this clash of characters. And so it tends to be that we're going to have these sort of all-white panels that really focus on the character action more than anything else. Some people feel like it looks unfinished, that it feels empty, but I feel like it's kind of iconic of Bleach, and that it's really that sort of almost minimalism draws my attention more to the characters and towards their expressions and towards the strengths of what am I saying? Of Kubo Tight's work. But yeah, that's all I have to say for this one. Obviously, I'm a fan of this chapter. I think this chapter is for me, this is pretty much the highlight of this battle so far. I mean, I know this has only been like two chapters, but this is probably one of the strongest chapters in the volume for me, just because there's such like a pitched battle between Ichigo and Renji. There's a lot like that the characters are presenting on both sides there. We get this really strong sense of both of their characters and where they are at this point as they clash. And we get that insight with all these other sort of characters, well, especially just Momo and Kira, but that is there, and there's a little bit of intrigue and insight going on that then comes back to Renji and Ichigo. And even though we want Ichigo to win in this moment, Renji is defeating him. Nevertheless, and like Ichigo seems like he can't even get a win whenever he's parsed out like the way that he's going to counter his opponent's move. So, it is pretty good stuff. Pretty good. Also, the art, I'm a fan. I think Kubo was doing really well, especially exploring like the use of his inks. Just like, again, like little things like here, like the very bottom panel is the one that the blood is dropping down into, and that it's aligned like such that like the blood is on the side that Ichigo is on. Just like a lot of little stuff like that like you don't think about, but is effective visually. Does a good job of exploring the space, using the space of the page. But yeah, good chapter. Loving this one. Blood Red Conflict, A+. Great chapter in my book. Kubo's book too, I guess. Anyway, let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about how this connects to the rest of the manga. Of course he's standing after taking a blow from Zabimaru. Just use your blood today, bud. Anyway, I do like that Renji's kind of taking it out and having all this collateral damage and hitting the building. He's destroying Soul Society when that's what he truly wants to destroy, even though he directs his attacks at Ichigo. Anyway, Yeah. The big thing here is, of course, we do have Kira and Momo having this interaction, and that they're going to hide from their captains the situation that's happening. Though Aizen almost certainly already knows that, like, he's kind of put the Renji card into play. Like he's expecting Renji to sort of go wild and out and do something ridiculous. So, like, he's already kind of pulled those strings. And then on the flip side, it's like, well, Gin obviously is a part of that plan too. And so this does, like, it pulls the narrative weight of trying to kind of separate Gin and Aizen to make them feel like they're not on the same team, which a lot of this, like, it feels like there's a lot of work done to kind of establish them as not being, in cahoots, which I like. But then, I mean, because it's true, but also because, we know that they end up being the defectors, right? But then the other big thing is like the ways in which Kira interacts with Momo, and it speaks towards the fact that they have this pre-extant relationship, right? And as we know, they all went to academy together, and so they've kind of forged a bond then, which is kind of cute. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't think Captain Aizen would be unfair to Renji either. I agree. We get, again, Momo being so earnest, which of course would be a bit of her downfall, and the way that she gets manipulated because she's very trusting and is willing to believe in the people that she trusts and champion them. Yeah, we get Kira being like, the one that to use a little bit more logic, right? To kind of work through these situations a little bit more, and I think that they realize that about Kira as well, because Kira very much gets manipulated by Gin later in the series, and by later in the series, I mean, whenever they break out, right? And so it's kind of interesting that then, and Kira is kind of fiercely loyal to Gin for whatever reason, and I think it's because Gin must have presented Kira with something that works in terms of like Kira's logical kind of parsing through things. Yeah, Kira's an interesting character because I always kind of, whenever I was going through the series, I sort of ignored him and sort of saw him as like, oh yeah, that's the emo guy Kira, right? But like, I think there's a lot of kind of neat stuff going on with that character that I don't know quite how to read him anymore. I'm interested to see to actually like pay a bit more attention to this character on this go round, because whenever I was a teenager reading this, like whatever about the character, I immediately just kind of wrote him off and didn't pay much attention to him. I mean, you're going to have to later, but I do like that. There is that sort of. I'm trying to think about, like, especially their Shikai releases and how they kind of reflect in this, where Tobayume, it's very much Momo gets very fiery and quickly passionate about things, whereas Kira is the one to more, over time consider things and then give them their proper weight, and then bring down like his judgment as it is due. But he'd rather people fall on his own blade. Anyway, metaphors. But it feels in line with the characters, and I like that. Of course, already talked about like this whole situation. I like that. Of course, Ichigo's going to save her. Makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, this is the other thing that I was going to talk about is the more powerful the attack, the fewer times it can be employed in succession, right? And obviously, the missile only being able to be fired once is immediately evocative of Soifan's Bankai, right? Though I think she fires that more than once. So I'm trying to think of like the battle with Berrigan, right? Doesn't Respira save him from her Bankai? And then the yeah. No, does she only get the one shot then? Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe she only does get the one shot during that. I thought she shot twice, and the second time you were sure that she was going to get it because of all of the keto that Hachi uses. But maybe it is that she only shoots the one time. Anyway, now I can't even remember characters. Like, I'm being Captain Kai. This is how terrible my memory is sometimes. I shouldn't be doing a retroactive series. I've made a mistake. But no. There's certainly this sense of, like, yeah, these sort of abilities, right, that a character can only use so many times. And I'm trying to think of, like, times whenever there are, like, limited uses to abilities, or, like, a chain of attacks that can be exploited. Obviously, like, the most easy one to think about is the Renji, slashing thing. But I think about Byakuya, like, and the idea of him, like, having this kind of, he has to flow the pedals the right way, and he has the downfall of, he can't have them too close to him, right? And so he tries to keep his movements in line with that. But yeah, I don't know. Trying to think of other moments throughout the series in which there are this sort of, like, you can only do this so many times, or you can only use your power within a certain sort of thing. Certainly, I try to think of other, like, kind of one-off powers. I mean, I think of Komamura, right? Of, like, his sort of lich Bankai, like, true form, that he can only really do that one time. Certainly that's, like, an immortal, very powerful power, even though we don't really see the full extent of it. It feels sort of like, not like it really does a ton to kind of defeat Bambi, but it's neat. Yeah, all this said, like, because it doesn't have to, like, speak towards, like, the amount of uses necessarily reflects its power. Because Kyokusu Getsu can be used as much as he wants, but he is vulnerable in using it, right? Um, right, if his blade is grabbed, isn't that the case that they can then dispel or see through the illusions? So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I think this whole idea of, like, your abilities having, like, a weak kind of spot in their reload, these sort of combos, and the idea of, like, one-off abilities, of course, being stronger. I mean, the Mugetsu, right? But, like, if something is more kind of successive attacks, it is weaker. Which I like that. I like that, like, Bleach kind of. I mean, that makes sense, but still, it fits well enough. But moreover, that, like, there is a patterning to an enemy's attacks, and that you can exploit that in between the patterning. I don't know how much that comes up in Bleach, honestly. So if you have any insight on that, please do let me know in the comments. But I do think that that's kind of all I have to say here. I mean, like, obviously Renji hidden some Shunpo to get out of the way. I don't even think this, honestly, I don't even read this as Shunpo so much as, like, again, Renji realized that Ichigo was going to hit him with this attack and got out of the way prematurely. That's it for this chapter, folks. That's all I got for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far in the video, please do give the video a like. Let me know that you've made it to the very, very end of the video. I do appreciate that. This is a longer one, so I hope that you enjoyed the insights that we had, and the times that I spent way too long ranting about how other series aren't as good as Bleach in certain aspects. There's other aspects where they're much better, but not the ones that I'm going to talk about. Nevertheless, I enjoy things. Enjoying things is fun. I'd rather focus on what I like about something. So let's do that. Why don't we? Speaking of liking things, speaking of celebrating the things you like, one other way that you can support this channel outside of a like or a subscription or whatever is that you can support me on Patreon. The channel has its own Patreon, and you are seeing right now all the current supporters as of making this episode. And I want to give a huge shout out to everyone on this list. Thank you so much for your support. And that's it for this one, folks. As always, this has been Karakura Gold. I am reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.